take a deep belly breath. The audience wants to hear from you. 3 simple questions. What? So what? Now what?
Matt Abrahams is Stanford GSB's go-to communication coach, teaching leaders how to speak clearly when the stakes are high. His viral Stanford talk on communication has been watched over 50 million times. He's the author of Think Faster, Talk Smarter, a practical playbook for speaking well on the spot. If you've ever frozen in a meeting, rambled in an interview, or feared being judged, Matt's frameworks are built for you.
Up to 85% of people report feeling nervous. Having a structure prevents you from blanking out, forgetting.
Most of my audience not an English native speaker, and I don't have to be A+ all the time, right?
They have this great saying, dare to be dull. Good enough is great.
Hello and welcome to Build It Up, where AI meets crypto, technology meets humanity, and East meets West. I'm Bill. Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to take a second to say thank you for watching, subscribing, and being part of this growing community. But we noticed about 30% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet, and nearly 90% haven't left a like or a comment. So if you are watching this right now and enjoying this conversation, do me a favor, please. Hit the subscribe button, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. Now, let's get into it. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining our episode, and great to speak with you again. As I mentioned to you, your lecture is one of my favorite, most great learning when I was in Stanford, and I really learned a lot from your communication lectures.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back with you and to have a conversation this way.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a first question. Maybe most of the audience would be very interested. Is what is your story behind your personal journey, like how you become the most popular communication lecturer in Stanford?
I don't know if I am the most popular, but I have always been passionate and curious about communication. I grew up in a family with a mother who was a teacher. She taught elementary school, and a father who was a lawyer. So we would have lots of conversations about communication and language. My mother would always be interested in how do you make something engaging and people wanting to hear it. And my father was always, how can you be as clear and concise as possible? So I grew up swimming in these issues and always found it fascinating. And as I went through school, became very, very interested in it. Ended up studying it in graduate school and then went to work in the work world and saw firsthand how the ability to communicate well led to success. You know, sometimes people who weren't the best or brightest, but were able to articulate a point of view, were able to get their message across. So I became very interested in it. When I returned to teaching, which is a true passion of mine, I really brought that real world experience and really try to equip people with specific skills to help them. So I'm just somebody who's passionate. I consider myself still on my learning journey to be a better communicator and just enjoy helping people feel better about their communication.
And I guess during your career journey, you kind of also pivot, right? You are not a lecturer of the organizational behavior and communication from the very beginning. And along the way, you found that your passion. So what kind of job you did in the early stage and how you sort of make the pivot in the middle?
I have always loved teaching. I've been teaching since I was about 16. I've done martial arts since I was 13. And when
Oh,
I was
wow.
16, I started teaching karate at the studio I studied at, and I really enjoyed it. Now, of course, teaching is in my family. My mother is a teacher. My aunt was a teacher. And so I've always loved teaching. And even when I was in an undergrad, I taught a class on public speaking. I team taught a class. In graduate school, I taught. So, you know, I really went into the corporate world primarily to pay off student loans. I needed to cover some
Mm.
student loans. But even in the corporate world, I ran learning and development. I started as a corporate trainer and then I ended up doing learning and development. So I've always done
Ah,
teaching.
okay. Mm.
And when my wife and I decided to start our family, I was working for a startup and I was traveling all over the place. And I said, I don't want to be that kind of father who was always on the road. So I came back to teaching. I taught high school and a public high school in the United States for 2 years, and then slowly graduated to where I am today, teaching at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. And I have enjoyed every step of the career and thoroughly enjoy what I do today.
Awesome. In general, I think when we talk about the communication, everyone, the by default mindset would be the most scared public speakership on the stage. For that one, do you have any very short structured recommendation or advice to everyone? Most of the people, they feel like it is one of the bottleneck of their career and everyone want to be a good public speaker on the stage.
First and foremost, it is very typical to feel nervous in high stakes communications situations, be it one on one or on a big stage. Up to 85% of people report feeling nervous in those situations. So it is completely normal and natural to feel that anxiety. That said, there are things that you can do to manage it. Let me give a few examples. So there are things we can do to give ourselves symptomatic relief. We all experience symptoms. So my heart might beat quickly, I might shake a little bit, I might sweat. All of these are normal and natural responses to threat. We see these situations as threatening. So, a great thing to do is simply take a deep belly breath. If anybody's ever done meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, that kind of deep breathing will slow down your autonomic nervous system and those symptoms will abate. So, that's one thing you can do. That's a physical thing. A mental thing you can do is remind yourself that you're there in service of your audience. The audience wants to hear from you. Many of us feel like we're being judged and evaluated, but most often when you are in a communication situation, you have some value to bring. And reminding yourself of that can cancel out all of those negative fears and things that we say to ourselves. And then one other thing that's very productive is in the messages that we say, if we can structure them, organize them in a way that's logical and clear, not only will we feel more comfortable because we know what we're saying is clear, but it helps our audience to understand so they will be more grateful and less judging. So, a great structure to use, and I know you've heard me teach this before, is three simple questions: what, so what, now what? So when you start speaking, explain the what. That's the information you want to get across. It's your updates, your ideas, your beliefs, your product information. That's the what. So what? Why is it important to the people listening? And then now what is what comes next, what you'd like to do or have the people do next. So if you take care of some of the symptoms, like deep breathing, if you remind yourself mentally that you're in service of your audience, that quiets down some of the negative self-talk. And if you have a structure, then you know that what you're communicating will be effective. So those are some ways to help people feel better on a big stage or in a one-on-one conversation.
After Stanford, I review my notes from your lecture actually from time to time. And you mentioned there's 3 steps. I am practicing the step 1, which is really helped me, when I go to the stage to do the deep breath practice. I even have an application to do so, try to make the effect significantly. For the third part, I think I need to prepare some homework, right? What, so what, and now what. And for the second part, actually, is very challenging to me. Sometimes I can pivot my mindset into, I am here to help everyone, and then it will make me feel comfortable. But to be honest, even today, when I wait for you to come online, I feel more anxious than my usual episode. The reason why is because I feel like a student want to have a podcast with a teacher, and the teacher is teaching the guru of the communication, which makes me intuitively I feel like I am being on the spot and being evaluated. I know it is a sort of I should drop this idea, but when I try very hard to drop this idea, the idea stick with me all the way when you come online.
Well, first, I'm sorry. My goal is never to make people nervous. It's quite the opposite. But it's understandable, right? I mean, we as human beings have a desire to appear confident and competent in what we do in front of people, especially people that we like, we know, we respect. And because of that, it makes sense that we get extra nervous. But there's some things we can do to take a little bit of that sting out of that. So first, let me use our situation directly. We know each other. We've had many conversations. I hope you know that I'm somebody who is very supportive and wants to know and help others.
Yes.
And when we remind ourselves of that, when we give ourselves just a little bit of space between the feelings we have and our understanding of those feelings, we can do some things. So instead of just getting absorbed by oh, my heart's beating and oh my goodness, I hope I do a good job, just to take a step back and say, this is me feeling nervous. It makes sense that I'm nervous. I'm about to talk to somebody I respect, somebody who's been helpful to me. It makes sense that I would be nervous. In so doing, you give yourself a little space. And in that space, you can do things. You can listen to a breathing app like you have. You can walk around the building. You can remind yourself that you have good things to say. So I would encourage you and everybody watching and listening that when you feel anxiety, try to give yourself a little distance. And the best way to do that is simply to say to yourself, this is me feeling nervous. That's a
Mm.
recognition of what you are experiencing, which puts you a little bit separate from it. Do you think that might help you? If you were to do that, do you think you would feel a little better about an interaction like you and I are having?
Yes, when I try to speak to myself, this is,
Mhm.
I am feeling nervous. I found that the tips you are teaching is kind of led me to be more mindful, like be
Mm,
aware. So in that case, there are slightly a detachment between my feeling and my conscious,
yes.
in a sense.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah, it's helpful. Yeah, thank you for that. And come to the step three. I really like the way you teach. We always structure the whole content into what, so what, and the now what. I remember you also teach like the past, present, future, and also problem, solution, benefit, right?
Oh, well, you're a
Uh,
good student. You remember all of them. A
Yes,
plus.
I review the notes very often. In some situation, which format or structure I should approach? Like, do you have any recommendation on those different options?
Absolutely. So, first, let me take a step back and just make sure everybody understands what I mean and what you mean by these structures. Many of us, when we communicate, we just list information. We just give a list of bullet points of information. Our brains are not wired to process lists. Instead, what we are much better at is connected, structured information. So, these are examples of structure, and there are many, many structures. The three that you mentioned, what, so what, now what, past, present, future, problem, solution, benefit, are very useful. And they're useful because they serve different purposes. What, so what, now what is a great structure if you're just informing people of something. You're teaching, you're
Mm,
updating, it's just giving information. Past, present, future is a very useful structure if you're trying to inspire people because you're connecting what was to what could be. And that's inspirational in nature. So if you want to give an inspirational talk, maybe you're the leader of a team and you want to get everybody excited, this might be a useful structure. And then finally, problem solution benefit is a great structure when you're trying to influence, motivate, or persuade. So you start with a problem, you explain how you solve it, and the benefit people have. So the answer to your question is really what is the purpose you're trying to achieve? If it's informing, then leverage a structure that's good at informing. If it's persuading, leverage one that's good at persuading. And then there's the added advice, which is use one that you are comfortable with. So I really gravitate towards what, so what, now what. So I will often use that regardless of the context, just because I feel so good about it. So purpose and your level of comfort are what guide which one you use.
gotcha. And can I categorize all the structures you mentioned here is kind of like how we can do a prepared conversation? And also in your book, you also mentioned the importance of the spontaneous conversation, right? So can we approach those similar structure into the spontaneous one as well?
Absolutely. So thank you for making that distinction. So many of us, if we've ever received training in communication, it has been unplanned communication where you have time to think about it. You can create an outline. You can actually get feedback and iterate, maybe create slides or ancillary material. And that makes a significant portion of the types of communication we have: presentations, pitches, meetings. But if you think about it, the vast majority of our communication is spontaneous. It happens in the moment. Somebody asks you a question, you're asked for feedback, you make a mistake, you have to fix it, you're making small talk. These are all examples of spontaneous speaking. And it sounds counterintuitive, but you can actually prepare to be spontaneous. Think of an athlete. Athletes do a lot of drills and activities to prepare themselves to be spontaneous in the moment of the game. And you can do that too in speaking. And these structures help you. When you get ready for spontaneous speaking, you have to do two things. You have to work on your mindset, how you approach it, and then you have to have tools to help you get through it. And these structures help. So, for example, if you were to ask me to give you feedback on something, I didn't know you were going to ask me to give feedback. I can use what, so what, now what to give you that spontaneous
Mm,
feedback. The what is my feedback. The so what is why I think that feedback is important for you. And the now what is what I'd like you to consider doing differently. So, yes, these structures help. They are part of what makes for effective, in the moment, spontaneous communication.
So basically, the structure can help both the prepared speakership and the spontaneous one.
Absolutely. Structure helps in all communication, written or spoken, spontaneous or planned.
How we can collect the feedback. By beginning of this year, I joined speakership, so I need to prepare. And then I joined
Yeah.
a studio session. And by then, I really got a lot of very good feedback because I spent the whole day and they watch me, they record the video, etc. I understand this is a very effective methodology, but not everyone have the luxury, time or budget to do so. So in general, how we can get the feedback, how we can evolve ourselves.
I believe the only way to get good at communication is three things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. You have to practice. Nobody has ever gotten good at a sport, a musical instrument, or communication without practicing. You can't think your way to better speaking. Second, you have to reflect. You know that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? You need to take time to reflect.
But that one is self-reflect.
Absolutely. So you have to self-reflect. What worked? What didn't work? How did it feel? How didn't it feel? I do that every night. Before I go to bed, I spend 1 minute. I write down one or two things that went really well in my communication during the day and one or two things I'd like to improve. And then every Sunday, I review my lists from the week and I make a plan to address those things. That's what I mean by reflection, really thinking about it. But you're right,
Wow.
feedback is critical. We are not the best judges of our communication. There are organizations and opportunities to get feedback. You can take classes, as you did with me. You can join Toastmasters, an international organization that's relatively inexpensive, that you can go to weekly meetings and get feedback. You can digitally record yourself and watch. When you do that, you almost become an observer of your own communication. So it's a way of giving yourself feedback.
Mm.
Finding trusted others, coworkers, family, friends can help. And using LLMs, AI can help. You can put in the text of a script that you write if you're doing a planned communication and interrogate it. Say, what ideas am I repeating too often? Or where could I be more concise? So there are lots of ways to get feedback that can be really, really helpful to you.
Interesting. I just come up with some idea that, maybe next time I should prompt to my GPT with Matt, your book, your style, and your YouTube, ask the GPT to behave like Matt
Uh-huh.
and to give me some feedback. I think that would be helpful.
That would be well, and hold tight because in the next few weeks, we will be releasing an AI coach, an AI clone of me that
Oh,
can actually
really?
really help you do that. So we are in beta,
Okay.
we are testing it. It is performing quite well, and we're going to release it soon. So there are ways to do that if you want feedback from me.
Yeah. So basically, I don't need to prompt my GPT to be a interim Matt, right?
You can now, but soon you'll be able to use that. Yes.
Wow, that's brilliant. I think Ray Dalio also launched his digital twin, Ray Dalio.
There are lots of people who have, and who I am not in their category, but my whole goal is to help people, and I think a tool like this could bring help to people.
Coming back to the AI, you're gonna launch the LLM version of Matt. Apart
Yes.
from that, how we can also try to leverage the AI to be a better speaker or communicationer?
I believe that AI can help us in many ways. Let me give you a few examples. First, if you want to prepare for spontaneous situations, have the LLM generate those situations. So let's say I want to practice my Q&A skills. I know I'm going to give a presentation. People are going to ask me questions. You can simply ask the LLM to ask you questions based on the context and situation you'll be in. That works lovely. Many of us, especially in our planned speaking, are not as concise as we could be. You can put in a script or speak a script into one of the LLMs and ask it to tighten it up and not just take for granted what it gives and say what it says, but look
Mm.
at what it puts out, compare it to what you had, and try to figure out what it's doing to be more concise as a way of informing yourself and learning. So I think that's another great way of doing it. You could ask the LLM to compare presentations and speeches from other people to give you an idea of what folks do. I do this all the time. When I hear a really good speaker, I'll go find 3 or 4 of their speeches the transcripts, put it into an LLM, and ask the LLM to analyze things like how many analogies do they tend to use? How many questions do they ask as part of it? And it's a way of me just understanding behind the scenes what are some of the techniques that these people use to make them, in my mind, effective. And then I can use some of those techniques myself. Again, not trying to become that person, but to really understand and identify what those folks do. I in my athletic performance, trying to get better in what I do, I'll watch other people who are really good at it and see what they do, and I'll try to do some of that stuff myself. So it's essentially the same idea.
Which model you prefer, or you use, simultaneously Perplexity, GPT, Claude?
One of the really lovely things about working at Stanford, among many things, is they've created an AI playground. And essentially, you can toggle between different LLMs very easily. So I will put the same prompt into multiple LLMs by literally just dragging and dropping. And I rely on different ones based on the results I get. So the answer is all of them.
So what would be your favorite top 2 or top 3?
Oh, I don't like picking. I find myself using Gemini a lot and ChatGPT a lot. I use Claude for
Okay.
certain things. But I go between all of them. Sometimes
Mhm.
just whatever's most convenient. I wouldn't say I
Yeah.
have a go-to for any of them.
Regarding the guidance or advice, I still remember you told us, don't try to memorize everything. So, if
Correct.
that's the case, if I go to the stage, I will be super nervous, right? Try to just talk naturally.
Correct. So memorizing actually works against you. This is counterintuitive, but when we memorize, what we're doing is we're stretching our already thin cognitive bandwidth. Think of your brain as a computer. It's not a great analogy, but it works for this. When on your laptop or your phone you have lots of windows and apps open, every one of those windows and apps is performing less well because the other ones are open. And
Mm.
your brain is the same way. If I have a script and I'm constantly checking, am I saying the right thing in the right way I planned? You are using some of your precious cognitive bandwidth to be absorbed in that task, which means you have less to focus on what you're saying. So the irony is when you memorize, you make it more likely that you will forget because you have less resources to be working on remembering. And that's where I go back to structure. If you remember your structure, not word for word what you want to say, then you actually have more bandwidth to get through your message. So if I know I'm using problem, solution, benefit, and I'm giving my presentation, I know once I'm done talking about the problem, I just have to talk about the solution. So when you have a GPS, you can't be lost. Having a structure prevents you from blanking out, forgetting, without taking a lot of the cognitive burden that memorizing does.
That makes sense. So basically, the only thing we need to follow is just the structure, right? But that one is a lot of content. We can just let it flow.
Well, that's right. Because, I mean, this assumes that you know your material, you've thought about
Mm.
it, and you have some expertise on it, right? So all I need is a prompt. All I need is, oh, I have to talk about the problem. I know what the problem is. I can share that story. And then when you get to the solution, I know what the solution I'm recommending. I can share that. But that presumes that you've actually spent some time thinking about and knowing it, right?
Yes. And I still remember one day I attend a fireside chat between you
Mhm.
and Eric Yuan, who is the founder of
Yes.
Zoom.
Yes.
To be honest, I was very impressed by his speakership because I can tell his English is not like American-born Asians' English, right? For sure, because he came to US, I think probably, around 30 years old. But
Uh-huh.
I feel like, his mindset and the way that, he expressed himself and also how he, leveraged the humor is very good. This is something most of my audience, none of them, I think most of them are not English native speaker. And what would be your special advice to all those non-English speaker and become a good communicator?
And I appreciate this question. Thank you, because this is an issue many people have. First, I am in awe and respect very deeply anybody who can speak a language other than their native language. I cannot. I can barely speak my native language. I make a lot of mistakes. So I very much respect anybody who can speak more than one language. What Eric did, Eric Yuan, founder of Zoom, and I was very fortunate to interview him. You were in that audience. What he does is exactly the advice I give. And as you know, I host my own podcast called Think Fast, Talk Smart. And I've interviewed a lot of experts in non-native speaking, and English as a second language, for example. And all of them advise what Eric did, which is try not to sound like a native speaker. You never will. You can't. By definition, you are not a native speaker. So
Mm,
rather than focusing all of your cognitive resources on trying to say exactly the right word with exactly the right grammar, simply focus on getting your information across. And let's talk about Eric. What did he do? He would say something, and then he would immediately give an example or tell a story or give a statistic that would reinforce what he had just said. So what he was doing there, if he wasn't clear in how he said it the first time, his repeated story, data, whatever, was a way to re-say it so you would understand it. And that's what all of the people I've ever interviewed have said. Put your effort into really getting your point across by giving multiple iterations of your point. And he is a master of that. So much so that he can actually tell jokes, but the jokes, if you remember, were reinforcing the point he was making. So it was yet
mm.
another way to say the same thing. So that's the advice I have for everybody. Instead of worrying about, am I saying exactly the right word in exactly the right place in the sentence, just get the point across and then give some other way of repeating it. And that can make a huge difference.
Before, so many times, I even have another Bill who sit
Mhm.
over there, judge myself, is my sentence grammarly correct? And
Yes.
that really drive me crazy because, I will never be grammarly correct if I was, if I am on the stage, perfect is too challenging to me.
Right. Yes. I have in improvisation. And by the way, improvisation is a great way to become more comfortable speaking. It's not about being funny. It's just about learning to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. In improv, they have this great saying, dare to be dull. Good enough is great. And if you take those two points of view into your communication, it can fundamentally change your anxiety levels and change how you feel about what you're doing. If you remind yourself, good enough is great. Hey, I just got the idea across. It wasn't
Mm.
great, didn't say it perfectly, but good enough. And just dare to be dull, just get it out. And when you give yourself permission to do that, it's freeing. It's freeing. And we all have the ability to do it. We just have to have that little leap of faith to get ourselves there.
Yeah. So it's kind of manage the expectation to myself, and I don't have to be A plus all the time, right?
That's exactly right. I really appreciate the way you said that. You have
Yeah.
to be a little gracious to yourself.
Yes, exactly. One more question. We have covered a lot of how to speak, etc. Can you talk about how to act with power, the gesture, the tone, etc., like those non-verbal behavior?
You're correct. We've talked a lot about what you say. We haven't talked about how you say it, and that's very important. So let me highlight three things that tend to convey confidence and are seen in people who have higher status and power in interactions. First, you want to make yourself big. People who are nervous or uncertain make themselves small and tight. So you make yourself big by pulling your shoulder blades down. You do a really good job of that. For people
Thank
watching,
you.
notice how you sit up this way. Um, Second, you want to make eye contact. In every culture that I know of that has been studied, eye contact is expected from the person who's speaking. If I'm looking down as I talk to you, that conveys uncertainty, even if I'm just
Mm,
thinking. So when you're virtual, look at the camera. When you're in person, look directly at the person. Now, I don't mean stare at the person, but you look at them. And then finally, you want to make sure that when you gesture broadly. Nervous people, if they gesture at all, gesture in front of their chest. They make themselves tight and nervous.
mm,
Just go a little bit beyond your shoulders. So if you hold your body balanced, if you look at the person and you gesture beyond your shoulders, you are demonstrating skills that are associated with confidence. And that can be really important and valuable for people. So I appreciate that you wanted to highlight that point as well. It is important not just to say things that are important and influential, you have to deliver them well as well.
yeah, I found that a lot of the great speaker, they not only they speak very well, they act very powerful, right? Like
Right.
Steve Jobs, etc.
Yes. Yes. Very important. You need both to go together, right? You need to have important messages delivered in a confident manner.
Just a side question, I'm very curious. Who is the greatest speaker, in your mind?
I'm going to give you an answer that you might not have expected. I have spent the last several years of my life really looking into how to be a better spontaneous speaker. And I think there was nobody better than Robin Williams, the comedian. He was also a very famous actor.
Yes.
But I was very fortunate when I was very young. I was in high school. I saw him perform live. He actually grew up and lived about 30 minutes, 45 minutes from where I grew up and lived. And he did a performance live, and I was able to see him, and I was just mesmerized. Not only was he funny with his planned comedy jokes, but he would do things spontaneously and interact with the audience in a way that was totally unplanned. He did not come in knowing what was going to happen. And ever since I was young, I was impressed by that. And as I studied spontaneous speaking, I would often come back and watch his comedy and see what he did. And a lot of it was intuitive and natural. I mean, nobody can do what he did, or very few people can. But there were some things that he would do that we can all leverage. There were some techniques he had. So when I'm asked who's somebody you admire or who's somebody you would love to sit down and really talk to about their communication, he is somebody I would have liked to speak. He's passed away, but
Yeah.
his ability to speak in the moment was legendary.
So I found that you are very impressed by his spontaneous communication skill, right?
Absolutely. His ability to put together, not only communicate in the moment, but make it really
Mm,
funny and applicable. That's
mm, mm.
I mean, added layers of difficulty.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, so my last question would be you teach communication organizational behavior in Stanford, and you come across, a lot of tech evolvement happening, AI from internet, robotic, etc. And apart from the communication, I think by selecting the major to the undergraduate, picking a right industry to start their career, a lot of young generations, they're facing those type of challenge and confusion, for the future. And what will be your advice to the young generation, who just kick off their college or who just start their career?
Well, I'm going to be counterintuitive here. I'm going to say follow your passion, do what you're interested in, learn how to learn. We don't know. The job market has always been tumultuous. What's in has changed a lot over time. It is changing faster and is a little more ambiguous now. So I think the best skills you can bring as somebody who wants to study is get smart. People who are smart and know a lot of things are going to do better than people who know less things. Second, learn how to learn how you learn best, get
Mm,
agile at learning. The only thing I can guarantee about the job market and what comes next is it's going to be something new that we're all going to have to learn. So the
mm.
ability to be smart and the ability to adjust and adapt, those are the two biggest skills I think anybody in school or anybody in their career should be working on. We can't predict where things will be in 5 years, but we can certainly predict our behavior and our readiness to adapt to them. So that would be my final advice.
So basically, instead of like try to forecast or try to have a crystal ball about the future, we better be smart and learn how to learn. So in that case, we can be nimble and adaptive to the future paradigm shift.
Well said. Well said.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, it's such inspiring sharing, and I really learned a lot. I feel like I got a free Q&A session from you.
Well, it was lovely to be with you. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You as well.
Thanks for watching Build It Up. If you enjoyed these episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and share it to a friend. And if you'd like to catch more stories and insights, you can follow me on LinkedIn, X, and of course, right here on YouTube. I'm Bill. See you in the next one.